You can't even exaggerate how enormous Conor's leverage is, because he's the one guy where, like in the story from yesterday, where Dana says to Lorenzo, John Jones needs to know we don't need him. Conor's the one guy the UFC cannot say that about it. And it's not that they need him. They've proven that they don't need him. But they do need him to not be independent and go start another organization or go to PFL, have them break the bank to go get him or whatever. Conor is an existential threat to them if he is not under contract with UFC. Not to mention, all right, we got a real bombshell now, dude. So I found out and verified information about Conor McGregor's contract that puts a whole different universe of factors going into the Michael Chandler fight in terms of negotiations with the UFC, in terms of the timeline of when we can, if ever, expect to see Conor McGregor fight in the octagon again. Because, damn, I cannot believe that this is real, because I have speculated about this many times, and candidly, what I had heard in terms of like what's the right word? Like rumors about Conor's contract were accurate. All right, accurate. And so I heard Ariel talk about it on his channel, and then I went around, I talked to a couple people, and it's true. It is definitely true. So I'm going to tell you what that is, and we're going to do my favorite kind of video where we get to talk about the business. Here is what we know. You know that if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you're breaking the rules. The rules here are, if you're going to watch my content, you have to subscribe. And 70% of you have agreed to that. If you're in the 30% minority that have not subscribed and are continuing to watch all the time, you're in the minority and you're breaking the rules. It's not a big ask. It takes 1 second. Just click the button, subscribe. Thank you guys. Rock and roll. So everybody's been sitting around waiting for Conor for us to find out when, if, whatever, he's going to fight. And everybody's like, what's the holdup? He's trying to wait out Chandler. He's trying to do this. That's why it's a delay. Okay, well, what we know now is that he does, in fact, only have 2 fights left on his deal. It's verified. Like, this is a verified fact now. Okay, Conor has 2 fights left on his UFC contract. All right, so why is that a big deal? He has 2 fights. Even if he has the fight, then he only, he still has another fight left. Right. Okay. So here's the deal. All right. The reason this is an enormous deal is because the UFC is obviously negotiating with Conor to put him into a long-term deal. All right. The fact that even after he fights, he still has a fight left is not like that's not how this works. After he fights this time, he only has 1 fight left on his deal. That is very different than having 2 fights left on his deal. And I can compare 2 different situations for you and all of the things that went into those. And then we can apply our learnings from that to this. Okay. Just right out of the gate, in terms of having 1 fight instead of 2 fights, the reason that this was different when Nate Diaz had 1 fight versus when Francis had 1 fight. What am I doing here? They both equally had 1 fight, but the 2 situations were totally different. Is because Nate Diaz was not the champion and Francis was. Because Francis had the champ clause, which adds a bunch of time onto the back of his contract, even if he's fought the last fight on his deal, if he's the current reigning champion. He got out of his contract because of the sunset clause, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Nate Diaz did not have a champ clause, which meant the second that he got done with his final fight on his deal, he's a free agent. Is Conor a champion? No. Which means that as soon as he fights this fight, he is 1 fight away from being a free agent. Every fight is more leverage for the organization, okay? If they let him fight this last fight and he has 1 fight left on his deal, it puts the UFC in a much worse leverage position than if he has 2 fights left on his deal, which means they're going to be very apprehensive about giving him this fight without him signing a new deal. As a matter of fact, they probably won't do it. That's why we're talking about delays, okay? Now, let me continue with what I was talking about. So, situation number 1. Francis Ngannou. The main thing that he wants is he wants to be able to fight Tyson Fury. The UFC has no intentions of doing this whatsoever, and this is all very relevant. Like, hear what I'm saying, because it's all going to play back to the Conor McGregor thing. Francis wants to fight Tyson Fury. He wants the UFC to agree to facilitate a boxing match for him and Tyson Fury. And the UFC is like, we're not doing that. Why are they saying they won't do that? Because in their mind, right, a very reasonable assumption is Tyson Fury is going to embarrass Francis. He's going to whip his fucking ass. He's going to make him look like he doesn't exist. And then what does that do to the UFC brand? It makes the UFC brand look not good. How would it have looked If they would have taken a chance on Francis, and then the boxing match would have gone the way it did. Pretty good. Could have been the death of boxing, honestly. If now thinking about that in hindsight, I actually hadn't even thought about that since I had just been thinking about the money side. I hadn't even thought about this part. Because I do believe that a main reason they didn't want to do that fight is because they thought it was just going to be completely one-sided. It was going to be embarrassment for Francis. And they also thought they probably didn't think they could sell a lot of pay-per-views to it. But they definitely could have. The UFC would have put their machine behind it. It is what it is. All right, so they can't get a deal done there. Francis's number one priority was he wanted to be able to box, okay? And they wouldn't give it to him. They would make offers with things that where it looks like, it's like there are ways to word things in contracts where it looks like you're giving someone something, but if you have an even moderately savvy person to read over it, then they're going to catch that it's like, okay, well, this right here says they don't actually have to do this. Like, I'm telling you right now, like, I don't have a law degree. You're never going to sneak something like that by me in a contract. Never. That will not I mean, knock on wood. Knock on wood. But 99 out of 100 times I'll catch a thing like that, where it's like, okay, so right here we put that fight in there. If there's any contractual language in there that gives them a way out, okay, then I'll catch it, I'll catch it. And so that's the way it was like being offered, where you read it and it's like, like the way it's worded, it's not guaranteed. If he does this, and if he does this, and even if he does these two things, you also still have this, so they could get out of it. That's not a guarantee. It's in the contract, but it's not a guarantee because they have ways out, which means it may as well not even be there. So ultimately, they come to an impasse, and Francis, they do the Cyril Gane fight, right? And they stack the deck against Francis. They put him in there knowing that he is injured, right? All of those, like, you all know how this goes. So he waits out his contract and he becomes a free agent, all right? But the main thing to understand here is that they stretched this out as long as they possibly could, okay? They couldn't have stretched it another day. Like, not another day. He had a sunset clause that ended up being the reason that Francis was able to get out of his fight, all right? Even though he had fought all of the fights on his contract, he was still under contract until the sunset clause. Why is that relevant for Conor McGregor? Well, Conor McGregor's been out for 2.5 years, almost 3 years. He'll have been out for 3 years in July, okay? In July, 3 years. He only has 2 fights left, okay? So maybe he signed a 4-fight deal when he did the Dustin Poirier one. Sunset clause was 5 years for Francis. That I can tell you unequivocally, it was a 5-year sunset clause, okay? So if Conor, in July, if it's 4 years, okay, July is 4 years. I'm sorry. So if he would have signed it right before the Dustin Poirier fight, that was January of 2021. January 2021. Yes, January 2022. So 2022, 2023, 2024, 3 years. So, okay. So anyway, whatever. I don't know exactly when he signed it. It could have been a 5-fight deal when he, went to fight Cowboy. I don't know, right? I don't know how many he had at the beginning. But that's the thing that we don't know, is we don't know when his sunset clause is. It is absolutely pivotal to really be able to accurately predict what they're going to do, to know when his sunset clause. If I knew for sure that his sunset clause was at the end of this year, I'd be like, man, the likelihood of this deal getting done because the end of the day, bottom line, Conor's leverage is so enormous. It is so enormous. You can't even exaggerate how enormous Conor's leverage is, because he's the one guy where, like in the story from yesterday, where Dana says to Lorenzo, John Jones needs to know we don't need him. Okay? Conor's the one guy the UFC cannot say that about it. And it's not that they need him. They've proven that they don't need him. But they do need him to not be independent and go start another organization or go to PFL, have them break the bank to go get him or whatever. Conor is an existential threat to them if he is not under contract with UFC. Not to mention the heat that he can bring to them if he decided to start publicly feuding with them. Do you have any idea how hard he could make their life if he wanted to start being difficult on purpose publicly? Think about what he's done just to the president of Ireland. Okay, he wants to get into politics. he starts just tweeting, not even talking publicly, just tweeting things about, or posting on X, things about Ireland, the policies that the Irish government's doing, talking about running for president, okay? And all of a sudden, the entire international media is talking about him potentially being the president of Ireland. Do you understand how much power that is? You have any idea how much of a challenge he can be to anyone that he decides to make a target? He has endless resources and absolutely endless reach. Anything he says is going to go everywhere. He has equal reach to Dana. You know what I mean? Seriously. So like, if he suddenly feels like the UFC is disrespecting him and they're holding out, they're not allowing him to fight, so on and so forth, he can start getting nasty, and it can be a real problem for the UFC, like a serious problem. So he is an existential threat to the UFC. Now, Conor is trying to play nice, obviously. He doesn't want to have a problem with the UFC. I'm sure he wants to do a new deal with the UFC. Well, I don't know if he wants to do a new deal with the UFC. What he wants is he wants to get his market value, which is not unreasonable. And candidly, as a completely unrestricted free agent, the offers he will have are hard to even wrap your brain around. Now, going to, like the second situation, which is with Nate Diaz, this was very different because Nate had one fight left on his deal, and this is part I'm speculating about. I don't think Nate realized he had a sunset clause. I think Nate didn't realize he had a sunset clause because, and I've talked about this on the channel a million times, because the whole thing with Khamzat where they switched fights at the end and, Khamzat missed weight by 8 pounds and all that. But the way that fight ended up getting made was the day that Ariel announced that Nate Diaz had a sunset clause in mid-October. That's the day that Hunter called Yahoo and he said, we've got verbal agreements from both fighters for Khamzat and Nate Diaz to fight on this fight card. I'd never heard Hunter do that before, and I'm like, this has to be strategy, because Hunter's a gamer, dude. Hunter and these guys are like the highest level negotiators in the world. I'm sure everybody else saw that. They're all, whoa, Khamzat and Nate Diaz. Okay. Well, like I said, this is how I think about the things, because that's how they actually are. Like, what's going on behind how does a fight get made? Okay. Dana, Hunter, Sean, Mick, these guys decide that that's what's happening, and what are they making their decisions on? We want to put on the best fights, but as soon as you start talking about, human assets, which are the biggest stars in the world, if you understand their contract situation and what's going to be on the other side, offers which they understand, then now you get into this whole multi-layered chess game, which is what we're looking at right now. Okay. Now, Nate, what do we know? Nate was begging for a fight, right? Now that we know Conor has 2 fights left, I mean, it's possible that the reason he wasn't getting fights in 2020 is also because of his contract. Who knows? You know what I mean? Like, the only reason he ended up fighting, you got to keep this in mind, the only reason he ended up fighting Dustin Poirier is because Poirier and Conor agreed to fight for charity. That's how that fight got made. They agreed themselves that they were going to go fight for charity, which I guess wouldn't have violated their contract. So, Dana and the UFC said, whoa, if you guys are going to fight, you're going to do it in the UFC. Conor was screaming, begging for a fight, calling the president of Disney, tweeting at them or whatever. He could not get them to give him a fight. And right now, I am going to say pretty confidently, that's probably exactly what's going on right now, which sheds light on why Conor would announce the fight, International Fight Week, 185 pounds, whatever. That's strategy. That's him putting pressure on the UFC. He's like, I've already announced International Fight Week. And Michael Chandler, who, wow. Chandler might be in on it with him, dude. Oh my gosh. Chandler might be in on it with him. Wow. Impressive, dude. I just figured this out right now. I'm not going to ask him about it because he wouldn't tell me anyway. But wow. Wow, dude. I might leave this in because I just figured this out right now. All right, so here's the deal. Conor and Chandler are, they're in conflict, whatever. But you have to ask yourself, why would Chandler just be completely behaving as if the fight, International Fight Week, is on? I just did a video today about how Dricus and Sean Strickland DM'd each other after the press conference and after their fight. Okay, the idea that two guys who are squared up to fight could not independently speak to each other and make plans is not accurate. That is obviously totally accurate, that they very much can communicate to each other. The organization hasn't announced it. Conor announced it. He said at 185. He's like, yeah, it's a go. It's a go. Let's do it. Right? Now, whose incentives are aligned here? UFC and Chandler? Maybe. Conor and Chandler? Yes, 100%. Chandler wants his fight to happen. Conor wants a new contract. If Conor and Chandler together, both are saying we're fighting International Fight Week, it's a go, then that puts the UFC in a position where they have to make that fight. Right? Because how did this happen before? I cannot believe I just put this together right now. How did Conor get a fight last time? Him and Dustin connected. And those two guys decided to fight for charity, like I just said. And now Conor goes, I'm fighting International Fight Week, and Chandler's all right, I'm in camp. And that's why this is why I hadn't figured it out, because I couldn't. I'm like, what's wrong with this? Like, there's something wrong here. This makes no sense. Why would Chandler just be like, yeah, International Fight Week, rock and roll? Conor announced that like, oh, he's drinking a glass of wine, and Chandler's like, yeah, let's run it. UFC has not made a single public comment on it. That makes no sense. Like, none of this makes any sense. Unless Conor and Chandler are in on this, where Conor's like, look, I'm trying to get a new deal. You want to fight me. I need a new deal. I need to put pressure on the organization. I'm going to say International Fight Week. Let's go. And that way, because if you're Chandler, you want to guarantee. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to just go to camp if you're just going off of what Conor said. It doesn't make any sense. Now, look, I don't know. I'm literally speculating right now, but that makes perfect sense to me. What I can tell you, though, is if someone gets me the information about Conor's sunset clause, whether there is one, if there is one, what date it is, man, I will be able to be much, much better at predicting what's going to happen here. Because with 2 fights left on his deal, I mean, there's no question that has to be what's going on. Okay? I mean, listen, dude, this is all speculation aside from the fact that Conor, for sure, only has 2 fights left on his deal, and there's absolutely no speculation needed to know what's on the other side of unrestricted free agency for Conor McGregor. Anything he wants. Anything he wants. If Conor McGregor becomes an unrestricted free agent and he does what he did with what Nate Diaz did with Jake Paul, do you have any idea what that event will generate? Jake Paul against Conor McGregor. It would be Mayweather-McGregor level interest. People will steal it much more than they stole things in 2017. But nonetheless, dude, on the other side of unrestricted free agency, Conor's options are limitless. His financial upside is unfathomable. And the UFC is hamstrung in terms of what they can offer Conor, because it's not a business model that is conducive to giving people $100 million for fights, you know? So it's just incredibly, I mean, this is just, it's a really big deal to know for sure that he only has 2 fights left. Huge deal, dude. Absolutely huge deal. So, man, I made so many important points here at the end. I think I'm going to try to shorten up that Francis part. But nonetheless, I love you guys. Subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, tell me what you think below. Bye-bye.